One. Hey everyone, welcome to Pleasure of Doubt. My name is Brett, and I am pleased to be here with at writer John Buck and Matthew and of the Betterment Project. Thanks for being here, guys. For those of you who are new to this channel, which is pretty well everybody, last week John and I had a great discussion on free will. I think we went pretty deep into it, and I thought it was a really great discussion. And we decided we would have another one on this channel. We don't want to just have these one and done type discussions where we feel like we need to fit in everything into a 1 or 2 hour discussion and get all your arguments in. We want to take the time, delve in, have some fun with it, really get into these arguments. And Matthew, thank you, has decided to join us today too. I think he has a different perspective, and I think it should be interesting. So I don't know, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? John, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure. I'm just a little nobody from Missouri that likes to have philosophical discussions and do a little bit of writing in my spare time. I'm at writer John Buck on Twitter. So.
And Matthew? Yep.
Yeah, I'm Matthew. I'm also in Missouri, ironically. I guess I hadn't figured out you were in Missouri, John.
I'm right on the border, so I don't know how close we're actually.
Gotcha.
But
yeah, well, I just I grind steel for a living and think my philosophical thoughts, and I'm trying to make a YouTube channel about it.
Cool.
Great. And I don't have the links in there yet, but I will be adding links later on. So you can, if you're watching, you can feel free to look up these guys. So we had a great discussion last week, and I think we're going to pick up from where we left off. We've had a few discussions off screen about where we want to go. I think one of the things we decided, we didn't talk enough about defining our terms in terms of what do we even mean by libertarian free will. To me, it's a tough one to define. I think of it as if you have a dichotomy of determined and random, if you added in a third branch, you would have determined, random, and free. So free will would be will that is neither determined nor random. So it would be included in the not determined, part of the triangle, but it would have to not. If all we have is a mix of determined and randomness, I don't think we have what would be satisfactorily called libertarian free will, what people would sort of like to see as free will. People tend to think, well, I don't want to be controlled, so to speak, but to think it's just not caused by anything doesn't seem to be any more satisfactory. So that's sort of how I think a definition of libertarian free will has to fit. And I'll be honest, my big problem with not accepting libertarian free will is I can't conceive of a version of will that doesn't fit somewhere in the random and determined dichotomy. So to me, it seems like a dichotomy. I'm open to there being this third branch free, but I can't figure out how it would look, and I haven't seen a description that gels with me of what it would look like.
All right, so if that's probably a good criteria then to where it wouldn't fit within either of those two branches. Probably then I would say like what we would need to do is to figure out what are the definitions that we're using for both determined and also for random, so that at least we have the understanding of like what the criteria are to be that would not fit within both of those for free will.
Sure, I think, and off stream, I think we were discussing this. I think determined means, if we call it that is caused by the prior state of events, the prior state of the universe up until the instant before the
right. And my one like stipulation with that would just be the addition of necessary causation, because from my position, even random events would fall under that criteria, where because the radioactive isotope it is emitted from, say, the uranium or whatever, but it's done randomly. It's still caused by the prior state of the world, because without the little hunk of uranium there, it wouldn't have been emitted off of it. So I would still say that, like, random events are caused by the necessary, or are caused by the prior state to the universe, but not in such a way that it is necessarily so. Like I don't know how to say that other than it could potentially not be that way.
Well, first, let's just look at the radioactive isotope. So if we look at it from a chain of causation point of view, so you have a chunk of uranium, which, so we could say that's a cause, it's in the chain. And then we have the uranium doing its thing, going through whatever changes. At some point, if it's truly random, there's a break in the causation. So you would say, yes, the uranium having to be there would be a part of the determined chain, but at some point, when the uranium decays, when the isotope decays, that may be a break in that chain, like just that instant of when it decays.
Is it a break in the chain or a I don't know. I see it almost as like not connected to the chain.
It's like a transfer of energy, right?
Well, that wouldn't a break, wouldn't not connected to the chain be a break? I mean, that's that. I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay, so within your understanding, the randomness of the decaying of the radioactive particle would still fall within random, or would it fall within determined?
Well, again, I don't know. I mean, on a pure ontological level, like is it just that we don't have enough information to predict it, or is it truly random? From what I understand from the physicists, they say it's truly random. I'm happy to go with that. So
for at least practical purposes, we can define it as random. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, even rolling a dice, supposedly a physicist could tell you somehow how they can determine what side of a dice is going to come up, but for all practical purposes, that is a random event. If we were trying to determine something with the use of dice, which I'm not sure that we would need to, but it's the idea of randomness is very relative to the viewer. I mean, it's not obvious that radioactive decay and things like this are in some sense random to the universe. They are a part of the universe. They are part of the system of the universe. They are only random because we don't have a way of determining how the outcome will be.
I think we have to say it may be. And I think for this argument, we don't need to nail that down, because what I'm saying is free has to be neither determined nor random. So we can,
I don't think random
say
gets
either
us anywhere.
or. Sorry?
Yeah. I don't think random gets us anywhere.
Right. It may be that it's actually determined in some way, or it may be that it's purely random. We can accept either, and I don't think it changes our argument. So we don't have to nail down what it is for the purposes of figuring out this argument.
Okay, can I interject something here that I think?
Sure.
Okay, so I think it's really important to look at the way systems of reality are nested and interacting with each other. So you have something like a subatomic system of all these quantum effects and such that can be extremely different from the rest of the systems we know in the universe. And it almost appears as if the strangeness and randomness of that layer of the universe, or that layer of that systemic layer creates the system we are riding on. And that system is what we usually consider the deterministic one, not the one underneath. The one underneath we really don't understand well enough to call it deterministic, because there appears to be all these random effects we don't understand. But then you have the deterministic layer on top of that, and it's not obvious that effects down below in the not subatomic, but
the quantum level,
on the quantum level, it's not obvious that those quantum level effects, those truly random ones, often transfer up. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe there's ways they transfer up, but we're not aware of that. We're certainly not aware of that happening in the mind. But at any rate, so we've got this deterministic layer we can talk about. But I would argue then that there are other layers of systems that begin not so much having a linear chain effect, but have something more, well, systemic. Like the basic laws of the universe, without the ideas of how you can engineer something, don't get you a car. Like if you have a pile of metal and rubber and petrol, you don't have a car. You have to have an systemic understanding of how to use physics and engineering to build a car, and then suddenly, voila, you have a car. So that is a different level of deterministic. It is still basic determinism, because everything
Sorry, why are you differentiating though? Is it what?
I think he's pointing out that like there's a way, like there's determinism in which is like mindless. Like you can have a Newton's cradle that hit the one ball hits this one, and then the other one at the other end moves, and you don't have to have any sort of understanding for that type of determinism.
I'm basically talking about causation taking place.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, but in order to like build a car, you have to have some sort of understanding that is greater than just mindless mechanism. Newtonian balls hitting other Newtonian balls. You have to have something more than that. Like you have to have some sort of understanding of the complexity or understanding of like what the thing is.
Yes.
Sure, there has to be some intelligent design, so to speak.
Right. Mm-hmm. Something going on. We don't have to specify what. And then finally, I think you can get to a point where if you have a system that is self-aware and has a process of making choices that affect that system, then you have a system in which, okay, the analogy I like to use is if you have a boulder rolling down a hill at somebody, that person is, if that person steps out of the path of that boulder, it's not that boulder caused them to step out of the way. That the sight of that boulder was a influence on their mind. And their mind is what determined what to step out of the way. And so it is the system. There exist systems that are self-deterministic. So
I see. So that's interesting, because you're able to like be self-aware. You have consciousness. Mm-hmm. You can see like the direction. Like imagine you're that boulder going down a negative path, where if you don't make any different, if you don't change something about your environment or your actions, then you're going to fall victim to whatever the deterministic laws of the universe are driving you towards. Right. So having that awareness of the outcome gives you the awareness of that, such that you can change your situation, all while still falling within the deterministic laws of the universe, it seems.
Right. So time, the awareness that a self-aware system has of the future, being able to model the future, in a weird way, it's as if we have the universe in our mind that we can back up and reverse and do that kind of thing. And then we can make a choice based off of that universe within the mind about how we will behave in the world.
Sure. So you're talking about will there. So we have will, right? And we have it contained in an agent. I think we all probably agree on this. You know, ourselves are the agent. We are a system of that. One of the things we do is exercise will, and we analyze, we deliberate, so seeing the boulder coming in, there's information coming in, there's information processing going on, and we make decisions and we step out of the way. So the question for free will comes in is, you know, if we're just looking at whether the system as a whole makes decisions, I think probably everyone here agrees that the system does, influenced by outside, but a lot of what's going on is within the system. I don't think that solves the problem of libertarian free will, though. I mean, that's, I think, compatibilism, which is that.
It seems like I'm kind of finding myself in between two compatibilists and trying to argue for free will. So, okay, I could start with putting forward my, I guess, argument, or at least a part of my argument for free will, which I sort of laid out on Twitter recently. Or I could argue against why I don't think compatibilism really works. It's up to you guys.
Well, let me first say that I don't think if by compatibilism we mean that there is a thing we can genuinely call free will, that's me. If we are saying, though, that free will reduces to mere determinism, let me put it in this way. I once heard an atheist, or, well, he happened to be an atheist, but a determinist claim that we are as free as a rock is to fall. In other words, the process is so deterministic that it utterly reduces. And I think that is the same thing as reducing a car to a pile of metal and rubber,
I see.
and it's still a car. It's like, no, you can't reduce the system. The system is what is determined, what is self-determining. It's a self-determining system. If you try to reduce that, you are basically breaking the system.
I see. So you think that by taking on sort of the deterministic lens, you're not necessarily speaking any untruths, but you're at least referring to the system in a much too simple way for it to actually be kind of accurate. Like
Right.
there is, due to the complexity of the system, referring to it as sort of this Newtonian cause-effect chain, simply as that, it is insufficient.
Right. So an analogy I like, it's not a perfect analogy, but if you think about a lake,
Mhm.
you know, you can look at a lake and say, oh, it's a flat surface, you know, and that's kind of the reduction of what a lake is. There's actually this entire ecosystem underneath the water surface. So I think if you're trying to reduce free will to mere determinism, it's the same as ignoring what's underneath the surface of a lake.
But so there's two things we can say. First, compatibilism. My understanding of basic compatibilism is that we may live in a universe that's a mixture of deterministic and randomness, but if we consider that we can act as a self-determined unit outside pressures, you know, independent of outside pressures, that is how we think of being free. So someone holding a gun to your head, you know, is not free, versus, you know, they take the gun away, you're free. That's how we sort of think about freedom in general. You know, you're put in jail, you're not free. You're but that's not. But so libertarian
There's a way
free will,
though that I think you could still be classified
Right.
as free even with the gun to your head. So say like
Right.
somebody is suicidal to where the point they don't really care, or like people that go to war, like they're willing to die for their country or something like that. So where a gun to their head doesn't really make much of a difference to them because they're willing to take either option. Now I do agree that we're put into situations where there are no live options available to us, to where like when you have the gun to your head, you do not want to take that option because of all the other things that you're kind of built up for what you're wanting to achieve with your life, whereby being killed would end that. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. I think
but that's sort of right. And right. So someone that pulls a gun to your head, you have the choice to not listen to them and they'll shoot you. So that's, in that sense, we have free will, and that's how we often think of. I think that's why Daniel Dennett says that's the free will we care about. Whereas you know, libertarian free will, I think, has to operate on much more of the micro level of where do we fit in the chain of causation. Whereas if we say yes, this self-contained unit may act in a mixture of deterministic and random processes as well. I think it's fair to say, like, it's too simplistic to just say the way we make a decision is similar to a rock rolling down a hill. What we can say is, maybe if we break down the information processes, it may be that there are some similarities there, but what we do is way more nuanced and way more rich and way more complex by orders of magnitude than a rock. So I think it's easy to get poetic, and we've got to be careful about the metaphors and not read too much into them. These are ways of expressing, of trying to get a message across. But I think if we really want to, I think we may want to try to be pedantic about it and really just put away the flowery language and say, it's well, there's two different issues. There's one, do we have free will? And then whether or not we have free will, how should we sell it to the public, or
right?
how
and
should
I
we
think
educate on it?
I
And
think one
that's
of the
where
other
maybe the poetry
questions
comes in.
besides that even is like, can we be sure that we have free will or do not have free will? And if it's the case that we cannot determine whether we have it or not, then should we make our decisions based upon practical outcomes for the situation? If we can figure it out what the truth is, then maybe just going with the truth works just fine. Yeah, that's the, I don't know. What do you think, Brett? Do you think that if we did have free will, would we be able to know it?
Well, that's the thing. As I've thought about this, I don't think we can really tell the difference on a practical level of how things would look under free will, under libertarian free will, or determined/random.
Do you think it would have a phenomenological difference between for somebody like what it feels like? Like, I know some people say it feels like they have free will for certain situations, or it feels like their hands were tied and they couldn't do anything otherwise. Do you think, like, if one was the case?
I think our feeling is separate from whatever feeling is generated is not necessarily linked to the ontological reality of whether we have free will or not. Because I mean, we have to accept, I think, that our feelings do not always accurately represent what is going on. So we can't just say because we feel this way, this is enough. So you might be say it is this way.
So you might be taking more of a rationalist approach, where because you cannot think of how free will could be achievable given our dichotomy of determinism and indeterminism, then whatever feelings we might have will have to be sort of subordinate to the conclusions that we've already arrived at.
I mean, frankly, my view is that I don't think we can tell the difference between A and B. Therefore, they're indistinguishable. Therefore, outside of sort of discussions like this, we shouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
that the practical effect is the same. We feel like we have free will often. We sometimes don't feel like we have free will. I think there are some psychological results that can be pushed in either direction, positive or negative, depending on how you sell it. I think there are some positive benefits to not believing we have free will. There's some positive benefits to believing we have free will. There's pros and cons.
Right.
But
you're not really interested in the pros and cons part of it. You're more interested in whether or not, like, we can come up with a conceivable. No, I'm
interested in both, but I think they're separate.
Okay.
There's separate discussions. We don't want to mix the two. Often I think people mix the two of saying, well, we would rather it be this way, or if we didn't have free will, people would when people there's studies where
in fact, I just found a paper by, let's see, Roy F. Baumeister and a couple others, the pro-social and social psychological from the Personality and Social Psychological Bulletin. And the title is Pro-Social Benefits of Feeling Free. Disbelief in free will increases aggression and reduces helpfulness. I haven't read the paper, but I had heard of it, like references to it, and I wanted to go through it. But that is a different point. And of course, I think we brought up last conversation, there are certain other psychological outcomes from the belief in determinism, like a bit more empathy towards people or criminals or people that have committed crimes.
Right. And frankly, I think, if we put our minds to it, we could produce a lot of different psychological results depending on how we educate. I mean, a lot of these studies aren't guided. It's like you're given this short excerpt to read, and then you're given a task, and you're going to see what that short-term effect is of that task. But, we could educate people in all sorts of different ways about these topics that could have vastly different results to whatever is happening in these short-term studies. So I think we have to be very careful with those studies. But again,
well, let me
I just want to be very clear. It's a separate question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Can I try something? So it's not. Well, okay. I think that it does appear to be the case, to a certain degree at least, that free will is not something we can so completely quantify as to be completely sure of it. but neither does it seem to be something we can quantify out of existence. We can't.
Maybe we can. We might be able to quantify
whether
it out of
we
existence.
can or not.
Yeah.
Let me try this.
Sure.
Because I wasn't trying to go there, but we
Sure,
can go
sure,
there.
fair
But just hang on a second.
Yeah.
What concerns me is it's not obvious to me that you will. Well, maybe that is the point. Do you think we can quantify it out of existence? Do you think that's possible?
Well, if it is true that determined and random form a true dichotomy, then yes.
Well, what do you mean by dichotomy? Where like if one is true, the other one cannot be true as well?
That things are, that when it comes to causation, things are either determined or random, and that there's no third option. There's no third prong.
How would you ever determine that, though?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we can do. First of all, I very rarely look at. I mean, I don't think you can determine it to 100%. But my issue is I don't think anybody's been able to conceive of how this third option would be presented in any way that seems to not be a mix of the other two. That's what seems to be brought up. It just seems to be, you can always sort of frame it in terms of randomness and determined.
What do you think of the people like Descartes or the dualists that say that there is an immaterial soul, which is outside of the deterministic causal chain of events for physical matter, but still is able to impart effects onto the physical matter? Like that seems like I'm not arguing for that. I'm just saying it as a way of conceiving of it.
I don't know why that would be any more free than anything else. I mean, it
wouldn't be made of physical things, so it wouldn't.
On the physical. Like I think we could conceivably apply this to non-physical things if they exist as well. I mean, it's hard because we don't have a good grasp on what a non-physical thing is or how it's made. But for example, does a non-physical thing have coherent, like if we're talking about agents, if we're talking about proposed spirits, I mean, which I don't really believe in, but let's say propose them. I mean, if they have coherent thoughts, right? If they have coherent actions, are they not also subject to cause and effect in their own realms, in their own, however they work?
We could presuppose that they were, but I don't know what evidence we would have to support that, other than, I guess, just inferring that due to our physical reality and the laws of it, we're assuming that, this spiritual reality in which there are no physical things also abides by some sort of law of causal determinism. Even though
it's hard because we're in pure speculation, right? But all we've said though is they impact in some way in our world, right? So if we say, like, let's take a proposed poltergeist who throws a rock across the room, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, wouldn't that still be within the cause and effect? It's still it grabs it somehow, it moves it from A to B to C to D to E to F to G. It still seems to fit in that way. It's not.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, there's a stopping point. Like the rock moving from one side of the house to the other is not due to the rock or the house or even the physical universe. It's due to the poltergeist
something
lifting it and then throwing it.
I don't really care about the word physical. Like physical, it's just a term, right? If there are non-physical things, they're things. They're not nothing, right? They're not. They're not.
And you just think that they would still abide by some sort of ABCD deterministic causal chain?
I don't know, but it's hard to conceive of them. It's hard to conceive of what this is the big problem, I think, is how do we conceive of something that's not determined or random? And I always get
in fact,
into one of those.
Okay, in fact, that was kind of like Kant's problem, and he thought that the very like causal causality was sort of a prerequisite to thinking. Like you have to think within a framework of causal ABC, or a temporal sense of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And while since for him, for his moral philosophy, you would have to have some sort of free will because ought implies can. He just kind of, I guess, put it off into the noumenal realm that was outside of our way of thinking.
Right, and it's just sort of saying it. I feel it must be so we're just going to posit it. And listen, I'm happy. I have it on the table. Like I'm happy to have it on the table, but we're running into the same problem I think everyone does, that once you start trying to describe what it would mean in terms that are not determined or random, we run into real trouble, right?
Right. Now, I do recall from our last conversation that you admitted that we can experience the feeling of free will. Like it feels like we're the author to our actions. Similar, like, I don't know if I used this example in our last conversation, but like just listening to a symphony and then the ability to sort of like focus your attention on the violins, or then onto the flutes, or onto the drums. This is like an active participation in in reality, such that like your attention is able to be focused without any sort of external inputs taking place.
Right. We agree that no external inputs, but the question is what process went on for the internal input to decide to focus on the timpani at that point, or the trumpet, or the violin, and ghosts popping in and out of existence within the physical realm seems to be not very deterministic. Well, it depends how the ghosts are doing it, right? If the ghost has decided to pop into our universe, or and manifest itself in our reality, I mean, that seems to be an A to B to C process.
It just wouldn't be the same A to B to C process as the things inside of our universe.
Right. But it has its own, presumably it has its own rules of engagement. It's just, if it's just not in control at all, and it's just popping here and it's popping there and it's popping there, and it just does it and it has no control over it, well, then that's random. Right. So
right. You were going to say something, Matthew. Sorry for cutting off. That's the thing with Brett and I. You really have to barge in.
Jump in.
I don't know how to jump in very well, I'm afraid to say.
Just do it, man. Just get in there.
So I was trying to figure out, because I don't know. I have a hard time following you two when you guys go back and forth. It's not obvious to me where you guys are in the thread in the conversation. So to try to set up some groundwork, it Brett, it seems to me that you are saying something like, I'm going to be skeptical of free will until I can see a mechanism that works for me. Is that what you're saying?
Or model, at least, that you can understand. Yeah.
Okay. Let me try something.
Sure.
Let's talk about what I would call minimal self-determinism and maximal self-determinism. So minimal self-determinism would be, so you're born into the world. You have all these aspects that are natured and nurtured into you, and you're just kind of going with that flow. You're making decisions. You are the system that determines your choices. You're not being forced from external sources. Those are influences on your system, but you're not doing anything in a self-aware way. You're just kind of following the program, if you will. That would be minimally self-deterministic in my mind, because it's still that self who is making choices, and there's almost no free will exercised in there. The potential is there, but there's no free will being exercised in such a being, in such a person. Now, to go maximally, or to try to go maximally, I think we were talking about something, or could be talking, like a model I would suggest would be, if the way we can become self-aware, we begin to model ourselves, and we begin to model our situations, and we begin modeling our hopes and our dreams and the potential for something new. And in the process of that, you're innovating something new, something that has never been existed before, like computers, like cell phones, like by golly, I'm going to be the first one to go to the moon, or whatever it is, you're innovating. You're producing something new. It wasn't pre-programmed. You're the system that is taking these disparate parts, these different things that are out there in the world. You're abstracting from them. You're creating new principles. You're creating new structures and new systems and new concepts, and you're figuring out how to apply those in the real world. And you're actually changing the world with these things. And if that's not free will, I can't imagine what we're even talking about. And it seems very obvious to me that there is a freedom there when you're so maximally self-aware and so innovative with what applying yourself in innovative ways. That's creating something new. That's something that wouldn't even exist if you hadn't applied yourself fully.
Sure. Now I agree with almost everything there, except for why it's obvious that's free, libertarianly free. Let's break down, say, one decision.
Hold on, because you never laid out sort of a description for what you would consider something libertarian free.
Yeah.
So, like, why wouldn't that work as a useful description?
Yeah.
Well, because
I'm very curious about that.
Because I think if we break down what's actually going on there, you've described a very big picture
reduce it
process. Sorry?
So reduce it? Is that what you're saying? If we reduce it, it's reductionistic and it's really deterministic?
I think we do have to reduce. When I think about these causal chains, I'm not thinking about, I was born and then this big event happened and that big event happened. I think we have to break it down to the Planck length of time. Literally, this instant leads to that instant, leads to that instant, leads to that instant. And all these things, so you could say an inventor coming up with some new undiscovered thing. If we break down all the thought processes that are going on there, are we seeing something that escapes the determined random dichotomy?
So is it just the fact that we're able to overlay a deterministic lens onto any sort of situation that we might have previously thought to be an act of free will? This is an indication that it was a deterministically causal chain of events for it.
Well, I'm saying that it's not just a lens. I think we're asking what is actually going on. Is the lens that it's free rather than the lens that it's not free? Like think about invention. Think about an insight that you have. I mean, how much control do you have over your insight? Insights appear in your mind, right?
Well, only given the right pressures. So in order for an insight to occur, I'd have to be actively thinking for that thought to sort of come up, or
not
go through a process of active thinking and then sort of take a shower or something like that. And then I'll have a new insight sort of come up out of nowhere. So I think there is both the requirement for active attention or intention put to it, along with some sort of indeterminate or random or unseen causal forces that bring about the insight to you within your conscious.
So but let's take a specific example, like coming up with an idea. I mean, there's so much about that we don't have access to consciously, right? Why did you come up with the precise words that you did, the precise images that you did? How did you, when an idea pops into your head, there's so much that we just experience. We experience the idea. Like Sam Harris would say, when you really introspect, when you really meditate, when you really contemplate, when you really get deep into it. And I've experienced this myself from my limited perspective of meditation, that what seems free is much less so. I remember my first time in a meditation class, and we were doing a longer meditation, and I realized at one point I had written in my head an entire email response to somebody who had emailed me earlier in the day. And without any conscious intention to do so, I was trying to focus on my breath. I ended up writing a coherent email. And I just realized at one point, I became aware at one point that was in the process of writing this email. None of it was what I intended to do. It came. And so
Right.
I just said the words, none of it is what I intended to do. Why did I say the word none rather than not any of it or nothing of it? Or like,
Okay,
how did I
well-
come across none as the first word I said? I don't have access to that.
Well, I think that's a good point that you're kind of bringing up, that like kind of drawing off of our experiences or our feelings to a thing, we can kind of get a better idea of what is being meant by these terms that are being used. So like for that situation, you had didn't have any sort of intentionality to write that email, and you weren't even really aware of it, but yet you were doing it otherwise. Now, for other situations, there are certain things that we're both aware and have an intentionality towards the action that we're doing. And that is what we more closely associate with like free will actions. And like, I totally agree. There are certain things that are outside of our control that we find ourselves falling into, like addiction or sleepwalking, or many different types of actions that are coming from our bodies or ourselves, or like.
Okay, but pause. You just what made you come up with that example of addiction? There were a million different examples you could have came up with. How are you aware of why you chose addiction there?
I'm aware, like I used it with some sort of intentionality behind the use of the word there. So like I knew that it was an example for the point I was trying to make.
Right, but you could have chosen a different example that would have made the same point, right? There are other options there. That's not the only option in the world that would have made a similar point.
Yeah, but it was at least the only option that came to me out of my control.
Yes.
I agree with that. But still met the necessary criteria that I had in order to say it. So certain other options might have come to me, but they didn't meet my criteria, and so I didn't bother to say it.
So Brett, I kind of object to your methodology here, because you're trying to reduce it down to a moment in time and recognize whether or not you can find free will there as a part functioning. And no, I don't think you ever will. And if that's what you're looking for, you can't find it. We're never going to be aware of the self-aware system, because we are the self-aware system. We're producing the self-awareness, the choices, the self-deterministic choices over time. It's a process. So if you reduce down, you're not seeing the process over time.
Well, but the process does reduce. I mean, listen, we do go through a process, right? So
right, yeah, but I think Matthew's sort of making the point that the process isn't a ABCD sort of thing. It's more of a broader perspective. So like the process of deliberation is sort of an exploration down this one path, and this one path. And it's the full thing. It's not just this small aspect to the whole thing. Like in order to make a decision, it's that broader sort of path.
Okay, listen. To be very clear, I am choosing a specific example to help simplify it. But the way I see it, it's not just an A leads to B leads to C. It's a web. It's massive amounts of cause and effect coming from every direction. It's a sphere. I mean, so I think of it as a web of cause and effect more than a chain of cause and effect. But I think
that's harder to conceive of, at least for myself.
It's hard to talk about. So we zero in on one choice, but we could zero in on 1,000 aspects of that choice. And the fact is, and that's part of the thing, there's so much going on in these deliberations that's going on underneath the surface, and that once you press down into it, the freedom seems to vanish. That's the problem.
What I'm afraid of is that we are privileging this idea of the deterministic system over the idea of the self-aware, self-determining system. Because if we're like, it doesn't make sense to me that just because the deterministic is a simpler system, that it is therefore like the foundational system, the system we have to reduce down to.
But they're not. These are different ways of talking about the same system, right? So it's not that it's not like the okay. I'm partial to integrated information theory, which take consciousness as a type of information processing. If what we're doing, like deliberation, I think is a type of information processing. I think what all of this consciousness stuff comes down to is information processing. So we've got neurons which are transmitting. I'm terrible with the technical stuff, but transmitting electrical signals back and forth in an extremely complex way, firing in all these complex ways, and that produce these that we have the experience of qualia of this sensation of thought and awareness, right? But that awareness, if integrated information theory is correct, or at least on the right track, awareness is a type of information processing. And when we think about it in that view, we can see it more in terms of it's stuff going on. And by the way, welcome. I don't know how you pronounce
Theo
it.
Sib, I think.
Theo Sib.
Yeah.
And wait, we only started at around 8. So, but thank you. We love you too. So thanks for popping by.
And Concept did get a little peeved at us since we never got around to defining libertarian free will.
Oh, we did, didn't we? We
really did not.
Okay, so I just looked it up.
Free will is neither determined nor.
Well, yeah, but you're defining it via negativa there, like where in regards to what it's not a positive definition of like what it is.
That's the best I can do. Can you come up with better?
Well, from the Wikipedia page on libertarianism, it says libertarianism holds onto a concept of free will that requires the agent to be able to take more than one possible course of action under a given set of circumstances. So I think in order for the libertarian understanding of free will to make sense, possibility has to be a real ontological part of reality. Like there is this branching universe where I could go down this one pathway or this pathway or this pathway. And in the moment is what picks one of those pathways. And once I'm on one of those pathways, all the other branches sort of collapse into a single, like if I wanted to make an analogy to quantum physics. But I don't think that's even necessary because this conception of possibility was even there within Aristotle, where you have possibility and actuality. And then the present, like time, is something where every moment that you exist is the actualization of whatever possibilities are out there. So a tree could, or an apple could possibly be food. It could be possibly a tree. It could possibly be compost. It could possibly be all of these different things. And depending upon what things that are already actual do with all these branches of possibilities, that is what it will become. So only that which is actual can change the possible into the actual is part of the Aristotelian physics.
We've had a long discussion about this on a separate. I don't know. Did we record it? I'm not sure.
No, that was our first real life or conversation that we had. It's from Twitter.
We should come back to that. But, I mean, briefly, my view on that is I'm not convinced that.
Possibility is a real ontological part of reality, right?
Right. That possibility is an abstract concept, but I think what is real is what is actual. Like we're always now. I don't know that the future or the past exist. That we have now leading to the next now, leading to the next now, leading to the next now. It's always now.
So let me tie that into the analogy I was trying to present with the lake, the surface of the lake. So the way I'm picturing this is the surface of the lake is what you're talking about. This is what has actually happened. These are the actions that you can quantify and view in each other's behavior. But what I'm trying to say is that underneath that is us, our systems, seeing the different possible choices we could make and deliberating between those.
Sure.
Now, if you want to try to reduce that deliberation process of, okay, you're always going to choose an option and therefore it's determined, I guess, but I just think that ignores the most significant thing, which is the deliberation process. Like it reduces past this amazing thing we're capable of doing, and which we could, it appears to be, we can talk about the freedom we have to make those choices and to process those things in that way. And so I'm skeptical of any attempt to dismiss free will because even though I honestly, I don't even like the term, because it's not the will that's free, because it's the choices that are free. We make these choices and then we determine which one we're going to do. And then our will is kind of holding on to that determination as best we can, is the way it seems to me. And it's not obvious to me that we are free from ourselves unless we are trying to be, well, I mean, I guess you could even make arguments about freedom from ourselves in the sense of meditation, or even deciding to make a random choice. But do you understand my overall point, though, that
Well,
if
I
we're
think,
making
yeah.
all these choices, if we're going through all these different deliberations and making a choice, then we're free. At least we are free in the sense that we have that capacity.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I mean, let's just put aside the word free. We have that capacity.
Yes.
And again, we've got to be careful to. I get the urge to go sort of more poetic of respecting this, but I think we should resist that urge to some extent. Let's try not to value judgment any of this, because that's when it encourages our biases, right? Where we're saying, if we're not giving respect enough to this, I hold we deliberate. We do deliberate. We go.
Is that a value judgment you're making?
Sorry?
Is that a value judgment you're making, that we should deliberate? It's better to deliberate than to not deliberate.
But we do deliberate. Like, we go through this process. I don't think of it as a play that's already been pre-written. We don't get to the end choice without going through that process of deliberation. We have to go through the deliberation to go through the end choice. That's why I think really there isn't much of a difference between how I could sort of conceive of libertarian free will working versus not libertarian free will. I think at the end of the day, we deliberate. At the end of the day, we are agents. It is this system that is me, that I have this brain, body, sensory, motor, dynamical system that interacts with the environment, that processes information coming in, information that's already in, and it's highly complex and integrated and so on. And
all right.
So
go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, so how do I say this? It's not clear to me. I mean, we're agreeing on everything, it seems, but the use of this word free will, which is strange to me. Like, why is it? So I'm holding on to the term free will, not because I like it, but because it is a useful term people use, and we know what we're talking about, and it seems to have function. And I'm trying to understand your reticence to use that term, or to accept that it has any use in reality,
or meaning to refer to something that we're in reality.
Yeah, the use of the term is very different from, again, we've got to separate out the psychological impacts of all of this from, do we ontologically have this? So
right. And I think in order to before we can find out if we do ontologically have it, we have to have some sort of clear-cut definition for what we're referring to. And so if we say we don't have free will, but we don't have a definition for what free will is, then we're kind of like making a meaningless statement, I think.
Well, so take the definition that you gave there. Like, how do we, I think we do have possibilities in the sense that we do have to go through that deliberative process. We have to make a choice. We go through a process. If we only know about one choice, I guess we only choose that. But if I have to decide where I'm going to eat, there's some restaurants that come to mind. So you
believe that
choice between them.
There is a like if we refer to possibility as sort of the conception of a possibility. So I don't know if this was I know in our last discussion we were referring to like choosing where to go out to eat, like McDonald's, Subway, or Taco Bell or something like that. If we're referring to possibility as simply the ideas of these places, then you agree that there is possibility as long as it's like stuck within our mental model making part of reality. But if we're referring to possibility in any sort of ontological sense, that's where you would sort of deny that.
Yeah, I'm not convinced the potential exists as anything other than an abstract concept. So I don't think that, in the Aristotelian way of that the potential exists in some real separate from just my idea of potential. I think potential is an extremely useful concept. I use it all the time. It's very useful. I mean, and frankly, freedom is useful, is a useful concept that we use all the time. That's sort of the compatibilist position. The Daniel Dennett saying this is the free will we care about. The freedom we care about is being free from external forces. That's.
It seems like even within the deterministic lens, there would have to be this concept, this admittance of the ontological reality of potential, but it's only in regards to a single potential that's out there. Like it's never going to be anything other than what it becomes. But like to say I will become 30 years old, like I have the potential to be 30 years old, and that is something that will be achieved, or possibly not. The fact that it is achieved is an indication, at least for, say, more the Aristotelian people, that there is some sort of ontological reality to what we refer to as potential. Like the fact that I become 30 years old is an indication that there was the potential to become 30 years old, even if that was the only potential to happen.
But how does, I don't think that an actualization, I think it is useful to talk about actualizing a potential. I think that's a useful sort of metaphor that helps us grasp these concepts. But I don't think that actualizing a potential is something separate from what we're doing. So when I'm
just a practical terminology, then.
Yeah, when I'm clapping my hands, I could say I had the potential to clap my hands and I actualized the clap. But what we have is a set of A leads to B leads to C where I clap my hands. There's not some other actual potential that something happened to. I am conceptualizing this as actualizing a potential.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. That's sort of how I see it. And I think, I can't blame Aristotle. Aristotle was amazing. He didn't have access to, I think, what we have. I think once we have a lot more understanding, I think, of how we go through emotions, how A leads to B leads to C.
And at least for me, like being somewhat more, or conceiving of myself as more of a pragmatist, where there is a difference in practicality to where like it's better to act in one way than the other. Maybe my intuitions lead me to say that it is better to hold to a worldview in which those practical like actions that we make, it would be better to hold to a philosophy in which those practical measures we make or whatever it is that we're doing make sense within that philosophy or that worldview. And so like if we act and we feel as if we have free will, then holding to a philosophy in which free will and acting as if there's free will actually sort of makes sense. Because otherwise, at least for me, it almost seems like a contradiction in action, really, or a hypocritical in nature between I act one way, but I talk another way, or I refer to reality in another way. You have to
go through the actions. You have to go through the deliberation either way, right? Mm-hmm. To get from A to C, you have to go through B, mm-hmm. whether it's libertarianly free or not. So why is it that big a difference? Why is it so different?
Because there are practical differences in the conceiving of the deliberation between from A to B to C, that where you do have free will and where you don't have free will. And there are practical differences in how you treat other people, whether you conceive of yourself or them as having free will or not having free will.
Now we're on the psychological aspect, though.
And the fact that you feel as if, like you admitted, there are the occasions where you feel as if you have free will.
Sure, but okay, I can't figure out, maybe you can, I can't figure out how I would describe any given task differently under free will or not free will. Can either of you
I would say the difference would be in difference in using active terminology or passive terminology. So say if I was to describe my decision to get a haircut today, I would say that my thoughts caused me to think about having my haircut, and then my arms caused me to drive to the barbershop, and then my my hands caused me to pay them.
Okay, I understand. I understand that, but that's honestly that seems to be semantics more than
Well, you just that would be a difference in how you would explain it, I would think, between a passive or an active.
But what do you think is going on differently?
Like on an ontological sense, I would I would say, I guess I would say that it was agentially caused, where it wasn't my thoughts that caused me to do this. It was me that caused me to do this. And so instead of laying the blame on the I agree that our thoughts come prior to our actions, and our thoughts, and then we deliberate, and then we act. But to say that my actions are due to my thoughts is sort of a way in which I see, at least, to lay the blame other than yourself.
Oh, but put aside blame. If we were to talk about it in the present tense of going through these steps, is there a way to describe them differently?
Okay. I don't know. In my Twitter thread, I referred to Sam Harris's kind of thought experiment in order to sort of prove determinism. And I was sort of using that same thought experiment, but overlaying a sort of free will model onto it. And it is certainly the case that deliberation takes place, but there is the self that chooses one of those deliberations in order to act upon. And if there was no self,
so we have to get into the self.
Yeah. Well, I know you agree that there's a self, but I don't know.
What is the self?
Yeah, exactly how much. I think at least one component that you would have to include for the self is the aspect of continuity. So we have this feeling of, or say, be it a memory of the past or the ability to empathize with our previous state, and then associate with that, or even identify with that previous state. I think the fact that we can do both of those things is at least somewhat indicative that they share a commonality between each other.
Well, I mean, I agree. If what you're saying is that continuity is caused by memory, I agree. But this is where we're getting to information processing. We have memories stored in our brain that we access somehow, that we, in a way, we don't have access to. We don't know how we grab a particular memory, or that they sort of come to.
Do we have to focus in order to achieve a memory?
I don't,
say if I was to tell you to, or ask you, what did you have for breakfast today? Wouldn't you have to input some sort of will of your own into the accessing of those memories?
When I really contemplate on what's going on, when I try to introspect in that process, what I find myself doing is pausing and sort of waiting, and then it pops into mind. I don't know if you guys have that same experience, but when I really focus in on what's going on, when you just asked me right now, I had to pause and I had to wait, and actually, I'm not even remembering what I had. No, now I think I had eggs. So and now it just popped in, but I had to wait for it.
Were you waiting, or were you asking?
Well, I mean, I wasn't saying in my head, what did I have for breakfast? But it's sort of expectantly waiting, perhaps, would be a way. How would you describe it? How it pops in your head?
I would say it's similar to that. We're waiting. It's if there is a memory that's inaccessible to us, it's no matter what we do, no matter how much we try and focus in it, try to get to it, it may just not come to us. I think only certain things are within our control. and memory recall is only partially that.
And
Let me try this, if I may.
go ahead.
Yeah.
So let's imagine, okay, so we have this awareness, we have this like inner sight. And with that inner sight, we seem to have, you have the landscape in front of you, you have memories that come to mind, you have emotions that come to mind. So it seems as if whatever the brain does, whether it's in a deterministic way or a random way, it seems to come forward into this realm of the awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But that awareness section, that area of the awareness appears to have an awareness of what it's trying to do, what its intentionality is. And that intentionality is what we're calling will. So it's like this part of ourselves, even if the access of memory, even of an intuition or innovation, I've got it, light bulb. Okay, but I had this will of determining to make that happen. Like that's the experience.
But we're not doubting will. We're analyzing whether the will is free or unfree. Will is there in either situation, right?
So
no one's
free
saying
is
we don't have will. It's
you're free to, or you're free from, right? Like that's the only ways we can talk about freedom, right? Free
right.
to,
Whether
or
our
free
will
from.
is constrained, I guess. Whether our will is constrained or unconstrained, I guess would be
yes.
So freedom to do otherwise might be a way that somebody would conceive of free will, libertarian free will.
Yeah, I get that's hard because that also could sort of work in compatibilism when you say, well, what do we mean by freedom to do otherwise? Okay, no one's stopping me from doing otherwise, so I'm free to do otherwise. And that's
I could see like within your understanding of possibility and potential as being concepts that or abstractions that we have, then you could say, I'm free to do otherwise insofar as what we mean by otherwise, we're just meaning deliberating over these other options. Right. But I think for the libertarian, they would have to disagree with that. Freedom to in order for our will to be free, it would have to be free to do otherwise in a real ontological sense rather than a just conceptual sense.
It's interesting that this argument is coming back down to whether potential exists as a non-abstract concept. I didn't anticipate that. That's really interesting. That's come out of this.
Well, I do think that has something of the root of the whole issue, because it seems to me that I have this. Sorry, I have a hard time not using the word free will or not wanting to. Like my approach is not to say, okay, let's define free will and then to see if we can smash it to pieces or not. I don't think that's a very useful methodology, because skepticism can be an extremely acidic thing that can tear through anything if you're not careful, and can even tear through things that are not useful to tear through, if you will. It's kind of like the car example I was trying to get at earlier. If you're skeptical that there can be a car because you're blinding because you don't understand the mechanics behind how you put one together. Let's say we're not aware of the mechanics of what puts a will together, but we're using this term, and I don't know. I mean,
I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's quite that analogy, because it's not that I'm not just saying I can't figure out how libertarian free will exists. I'm also saying how we think, how we make decisions, and all that seems to be pretty fully explained by a mix of determined random, right? So that seems to all. So it's not just I don't know how a car works, so I can't conceive of one. Therefore, and then I see a car, and then you see a car like, oh, and I doubt my eyes. No, I mean we're put it this way: we either have free will or we don't. We're trying to figure out how do we characterize our actual ways of thinking. That's what we're trying to figure out. We have this experience of thinking, and we're trying to say, how do we characterize this? How do we classify it? And you may say, hey, we actually shouldn't have this conversation. There are negatives, and I'm open to that too. I think we do have to be responsible, and that's almost a separate conversation. I I think there are positives to both side, but that's a whole conversation on its own. But
If we were talking about self-determinism instead of free will, would you feel like you would be having the objections you are?
Probably not. If I'm understanding self-determinism as just, this is the system that operates on its own and, influenced by the outside, but also having its own functions. That's
so your
what you mean?
objection is how free that self-deterministic process is?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That's helpful.
There is this one question that I had, because like similar to how you can't conceive of like how a model in which we have free will that doesn't fall within determinism or randomness, or that goes outside of those. I can't exactly conceive of the term agency making any sense within a deterministic or a compatibilistic worldview.
Sorry, say that again.
I can't conceive of how the word agency makes any sense within a deterministic worldview. Like it seems almost like a term that, or it would be a term that is almost like referring to an illusory thing.
Okay, well, let's break it down. What do we mean by agent?
So like, it seems like when most people use agency, they're meaning like I have control over our actions. So like to say I have agency is to say I have control over my actions.
Like if we put aside just the nuances of the word control, I mean, if we accept I am a system, right? That I am a system, I would conceive of it as I'm an integrated information processing system, but I am a system. My brain body, what Vervaeke calls it, the motor sensory system, that we have a brain, we have a brain and mind and body that interact together in a system, and that I process information, I make choices, I make decisions, I talk, I have feelings. So all of that to me is agency. I am the one.
Is it just exhibiting behaviors then? Like to say something has agency is to say that it exhibits behaviors unique to itself?
Maybe, but it doesn't seem to. It's like there's a nuance that's not.
Yeah,
but it's on the right track. But like, I think we really do deliberate. Like again, you can't get there without going through all of this. So to me, that's agency. Like we have to go through these processes. Look, we just came to some conclusion about, like, I just came to a realization that the potential and actual factor into this. That never occurred to me before.
Yeah, I actually didn't expect that either.
But we had to go through this conversation to get to that conclusion. That's meaningful, right? So whether or not we have free will, we have meaning. That's just as meaningful whether we characterize it as a free process or a not free process. Because we cleaning agents are. I'm very conscious about it. I will get better over time. I don't understand how all these guys have intellectual debates and read the chat at the same time and seem to pay attention to all of it. I'm not good at it yet. At one point, I hope to be, but I have to focus on the discussion, and in the chat, then I lose track of the discussion. So I don't want to ignore you, but maybe we'll take a moment where we do some chat. It's so hard. I don't know how people do it.
Okay, so at least maybe what I'm trying to get at is the idea of gradations of agency. Like to say that I was more free to do one thing or less free given other circumstances, things like that. I can't think of a way in which to reframe that phrase, which seems to have meaningful content to it, that refers to our experience within reality, within a deterministic lens. Because to say that you have more control or less control over your circumstances seems to be a farce within a deterministic understanding of the world, because determinism, at least from my understanding, says that you never have control over your actions.
But I mean,
they're outside of your control.
But it's if it's determined within this system. It's still me. I am the system that is that is doing it. I may operate in a determined / random way, but it is me. I am a necessary part of it. Without me doing this, it doesn't happen.
Okay,
right?
so
it's
what?
go ahead.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, what do you guys think about? It's long been my suspicion that when we're talking about freedom, we're really talking about capacity. Because if you don't have the capacity to do something, there's not much sense in talking about the freedom to do it.
I don't think I've heard that term before. What do you mean by capacity?
Capacity?
Oh, capacity.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I have bad language skills.
No.
So if I have the capacity, I put an M in there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an Arzark thing or where that's coming from, but anyway, if I have the capacity to make a choice and to deliberate, these are things that I am capable of doing. And okay, I think I'm starting to see the difficulty. It's hard to say, am I free to do them because I have the capacity to do them?
Yeah, I think the determinists would have to deny that we have multiple capacities to do things. Like the only capacity that we have, similar to like the only potential that the world has, is singular, that which does occur. So you're only capable of doing that which you did. In a similar,
but I have a problem with framing it that way. It doesn't seem to get it. Like okay, I have a choice. My next sentence could go a bunch of different ways.
No. I'm referring to an ontological capacity,
right?
Not a conceptual capacity. Because it seems like when we're using these terms like potential and possible and capacity, you're referring to the conceptual, like thinking of the enactment of the thing rather than the actual ontological reality of the thing.
But it's only ontological reality because it went through a certain path. Is that what you're saying? Like, because like it's not that it was
sure. Yeah.
Impossible. You're not saying it's logically impossible. You're just saying it didn't go down that path.
Well, I think that, okay, so I think the determinist would say that it was sort of a logical impossibility because it is very much the case that you cannot do otherwise than what you did, or at least within the deterministic understanding. Excuse me. So there would be no other way in which you could do something other than what you did. I know it's kind of a weird phrasing for it because it's like using a present tense it's like using a past tense in reference to a present one or something. Like you cannot do otherwise.
I get what you're getting at. I probably have to think. I have to sit with it a little more. Like there's something that there's something that's not quite sitting right with me with it, but I'm not sure if that's just cognitive dissonance or whether there's something there. So I have to figure out.
Okay. So do you think though that capacities are something like, is that a term that would only make sense within some sort of free will understanding of the universe? Like to say somebody is capable of, say, becoming a doctor or becoming a fireman, that would be maybe a useful fiction that we could use within compatibilism.
I would say it's a useful abstract concept. Like, I mean, I use that all the time. Like, and there are some people who would say, look, some people may not have the capacity to become a doctor, but like I would not have the capacity. There are certain jobs I would be very bad at.
Definitely.
And,
yeah.
But so
and the libertarian would definitely agree that there are incapacities and capacities. Like it's not the case that simply because I will to become a fireman, but I don't meet the necessary criteria for that that capacity was actual or not even actual, but even a possible one. It was simply a conceptual one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just something I've got to sit with and figure out. Like, there's something
Sure.
I guess because I'm so used to talking about capacity and possibility in
it's
the
very useful term. Yes.
It is, and it's extremely useful. But how do we?
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way in which you can use a similar term within compatibilism. Probably the way in which you were saying it, where capacity is simply what we're referring to as our deliberating processes that are going on within our heads, not necessarily referring to anything in the outside world or even into the future.
And I should say, like, part of my point, and I don't know, and I'll be honest, I don't know if this is motivated thinking that that I want there not to be a difference, so I found a way to argue it. But to me, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference. So, like what you were saying, Matthew, that is, we've got to be careful with these discussions. I think my argument is, I think we can come to very similar conclusions whichever way we go, and I think we sometimes put too much emphasis on the difference, where we think things would be radically different if it were the other way. And I'm not quite sure, because whenever I try to break it down, and I know you don't like reducing, but I think we kind of have to, if we want to think about it ontologically and not just symbol. I think thinking about these things symbolically and abstract are incredibly useful, and it's how we grasp, concepts. And so that's great, but it hides certain stuff too. If we want to just figure out what's going on, I think we have to get to the micro. And I don't know at the micro if there's a big difference. So far, we've been struggling how to really explain it, other than we have to get big, right? Like even you, John,
Right.
you were going back out bigger in saying, I would describe it as, well, my body did this versus I did this. But once you zero in on the micro, doesn't it get closer to looking the same?
I guess like there's a way in which you could frame it within the micro, like even just to use, say, like a analogy to quantum mechanics, where in the very micro parsecs of the photon reaching a 50% opaque screen, to where it will either pass through the opaque screen or it will bounce off of the reflective screen. In that very moment, there was no necessity for it doing one or the other. Like that is in which I believe there is an ontological reality to randomness. I know Concept in the chat completely disagrees with me on that. So using that as analogy also to human freedom, to where there are these two diverging paths, maybe multiple diverging paths, in which either outcome would be capable within one's own control of achieving. And it's not due to any sort of prerequisite state of the universe.
But that's the thing. Like, if it's just random, that doesn't really satisfy us?
Well, I wasn't using it in regards to random, just in regards to indeterminate. So it wasn't determined by the prior. Like, I don't think the photons passing through or bouncing off was determined by any prior state to the universe. I think that probably is a case where randomness takes place. I know there's certain like wild theories where the photon actually has a certain amount of agency, where it can choose to pass through or bounce off. But I don't agree with that.
Let me ask you guys,
likely just random.
If consciousness and will is a type of information processing, does that make the determined/random dichotomy more palatable?
Does it make determinism?
I could understand that for consciousness, because I can conceive of consciousness taking place as just like another qualia experience, like in the same way that like a rock is wet or water is wet or a rock is heavy or something like that. There could be certain objects that have consciousness that are just experiencing reality in a sort of catatonic state or a locked-in syndrome sort of state, where they cannot do anything at all other than experience reality. Now, I don't think that is all, and that is what I would conceive as a information processing, where there is this qualia coming in. But I think of consciousness, and especially will or free will, as being where you're aware of your own actions and able to self-direct these actions via your intention or attention or your focus.
But what do you think ontologically is going on? Like, I think most likely, it's not certain, but I think what's going on at the micro level is that is an information processing process, what you just described. That exercising of will is a type of information processing. Do you think it's something different than that?
I guess it would sort of so like if I could conceive of it as an information processing if there was a singular will. Say there was the like ingrained will within us to maximize fitness, something like that. Let's imagine that's our singular will. And so all things would be framed within that singular will, and then our actions would be determined by that. Similar to like a calculator, you have it with additions and subtractions, and it would do this sort of information processing. I don't actually believe that we have a singular will.
You're thinking of pretty simple information processing. I'm talking about really complex information processing that goes way beyond what. So
I'm saying that I don't think that we have a singular will within us. I think we're a composition of many different types of wills within us, to where we can act upon one will or the other.
Will is just a different information processing through the brain. Isn't that consistent with what you just said?
Let's see. Yeah, probably. But there would need to be some sort of meta information processing system that then makes choices.
That would be the
which one to
like the integrated
go with.
The integrated system is I think what you're almost getting. I think you'll find integrated information theory pretty interesting because
I've been listening to some of Tenodi's stuff. I have to get a better understanding of it, and maybe in order to do that, I'll have to read like some of his papers, because as of right now, I'm not entirely sure what he's meaning by information. And how it becomes integrated or not.
Yeah, and information is tricky because we tend to think of information as like words on a page and all that, but information like photons, hitting your eyes, wavelengths of light hitting your eyes, that's information, right? It's translated in the brain. That's information. Everything is information.
Well, that seems like two different types of information. The wavelength of the photon, and then the translation of it into some sort of mental qualitative
well, the qualia would be the qualia sensation of the information being processed, I guess. So that
there is information processing that is just processing the information, and then there's information processing that stops and makes deliberative choices between options.
Oh, there's all sorts of it. I mean, our brains are incredibly complex.
Well, let me try this. Okay, so there's two ways. I'm not going to use the term reductionist this time. I'll try to use the term simplify. We can simplify freedom down to something like I have complete ontological freedom. That seems to be an oversimplification of the concept we're trying to work with.
And by freedom, are we just meaning control over our actions?
Yes.
Or like self-control over our actions, maybe.
I'll jump back to self-determinism.
Okay.
It just seems a cleaner term. I prefer it anyway. I just think it's so parallel to talking about free will that I don't know. I have a hard time not using it, honestly.
Yeah.
But we can reduce self-determinism to I can determine every single choice I'm going to make. I can determine everything. That seems an oversimplification of the process. It's more complicated than that. We are not always free. We have limitations, and those limitations create complexity. On the other extreme, we can say that our self-determinacy is so determined by external forces that it is as if we do not self-determine at all. And that is another extreme of oversimplifying the system. So somewhere between these two oversimplifications, that I determine everything and that I determine nothing, is where we're trying to figure out. It's like that's what it seems
but
like
you're
that's
focusing there on the difference between this system and that system. I'm saying I want to look at what this system is doing. That is what we care about for libertarian free will.
I'm aware of that, but what I'm trying to say is that, again, I think this system, we have to be careful how we reduce it down, because this system is not just in this minute. It is existed for, in my case, 42 years. And it has evolved through that process. And I can look back at all that and I could go, I can see where I went wrong there and there and there. I will choose future Matthew to do this, this, and this. That is almost like, if you look at a causal chain that starts looping back on itself and starts creating all kinds of squiggles in the air.
No, but it's not. But your memory is in the present, though, right? what you just said, looking back,
It's in the present,
not,
but
no, no, but hold on,
it is
hold
of
on.
a.
But you're not actually going back in the past. You have a memory of what happened. You're accessing that memory now. You're not actually accessing your past self. You're accessing your memory of what happened in the past. That's happening now in the present.
Yes. So what you're trying to do, it sounds like, is you're trying to narrow down the range of possibilities. You're trying to say, well,
no,
it's
I'm trying
not
to figure out what's actually happening.
Well, I think he's bringing up the point that, like, kind of like what we agreed on earlier, that when we try to refer back to our memories, that it's not the case that we have complete access over all of our memories. Like, the only reason that we can look to our past and see that, oh, 2 years ago, I made this horrible mistake, I don't want to do that again, is because we have the memory of that mistake. And so there's plenty of things 2 years ago that we don't have memories of, simply because it was took up too much space and was sort of disregarded outside of our control. I don't know if that's kind of where what you were bringing up there, though, Brett.
I was saying that I am okay. There's an entire chain of causation that brought me to today, right? But today is what exists. It's when it's happening now that leads to the next moment. So the state of the universe today leads to the state of the universe an instant from now, and an instant from now, and an instant from now. Part of the state of the universe is our memories of what happened before.
That seems almost like too broad of a position to take, because, like, it's not the case that the entire state of the universe causes me to do this one certain thing. It's only a very small subsection of the entire state of the universe that causes this one thing to happen.
It's the most recent link in the chain.
Yeah, but I don't think you have to refer to the entire state of the universe in order to say that. You can just say, oh, the state of you in this present moment causes you to do the thing in the next present moment.
But I think we're talking there of layers of abstractions, how we can zero in on it in different ways, right? Like, we can talk about different aspects. That's the whole point. It's not just A leads to B leads to C. It's a massively complex web, and there's so many different ways we can look at it, right? But I was just going off Matthew's point that it's not that our past self is not influencing our present self. We are making deliberations now, in part based on our memories of our past selves.
Wait.
That's, if you break it down to what's happening. Sorry?
And the models of our future.
Sure, that's part of the information.
Our memories
processing.
are basically models. The reduction we've reduced to save memory or whatever. You know, it's an abstraction. But I don't know. I'm.
There's a way in which I can interpret what you just said there, Brett, as an argument for free will, where it's not the case that our past self is determining our actions right here in the present. It's what our present self is doing right now that causes the future to change.
But I'll come back to my thought experiment, which is what long ago I think I was influenced by others, but I can't remember if I came up with my version or whatnot, but I know there are a bunch of different versions of this, which is if we take our last decision and we rewound the universe back to that state, absent randomness, could we ever have having chosen A, absent randomness, could we have chosen B?
See, that's I don't see that has any pertinence to the issue at all.
I mean, it's the whole issue. So
no, it's not, because that's reducing down. Of course, I would do the same thing because I'm the same person making the same choice. Like that doesn't.
But then that's determined.
Well, no.
I mean,
yes. Yeah, simply because a free agent makes a choice in a certain way, and if you were to rewind time, that free person would make that same choice. That doesn't mean that they were determined to make that choice. I don't think, because
they're always going to make the same choice.
Well, no. Okay,
randomness,
take the Aristotelian model where there are these branchings of universes that can go on. Say, I could become a doctor, I could be a fireman, I could become a teacher. Those are the different branches for. Actually, that's too broad. Let's put it into the here and now. I'm sitting at a restaurant. A waiter gives me a menu, and there is macaroni, steak dinner, and a hamburger. And they're within the Aristotelian model. There are these three branching universes: one where I have the macaroni, one where I have the steak dinner, one where I have the hamburger. Only one of those can be an actual outcome. And so it's the case that the present self is the thing that determines which of those potential futures becomes an actual one. At least that's the way in which it would frame
that potential future doesn't exist in any way. It's an abstraction, right?
All right, so this is where I guess maybe we could you're saying it's an abstraction, but you haven't proved it to be so. You're just I guess just as a use of Occam's razor, you don't need it to be so. Or is it just that you can't conceive of how it could exist even though it doesn't exist?
Well, it's that I think everything is fully explained. Maybe so it's an Occam's razor. I think everything is fully explained without needing to resort to it. Therefore, there's no reason to assume it.
So would you accept that there is one potential future and that being the future that does occur? So imagine
it's the same thing we came back to that
you can imagine it like
the language.
Okay, imagine it like a timeline. And we're on the little skimmer for that timeline. And we're always going to move along that timeline to that. I don't know if I'm moving it the correct way for YouTube or not, but we're always going to be moving along that timeline. Now, for the determinist, there is a potential future. It's just always that timeline. And maybe not all determinism is like that. Maybe it's like sands building up on every sand is created in the past moment to pile up on top of itself so that it becomes this next moment. And there is no actual future or potential future that we're achieving. Rather, it is just this sand pile building up upon itself.
That we're always in the present, that we're moving from one present to the next present to the next present to the next present. That's sort of how I see it. That we're always actual. There's no unactual. There's no.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense to me because it seems like there's an equivocation of terms with present there because one present, the next present. It seems like we're referring to two different things, two different places in time, but we're still referring to it as the same thing.
Only the present exists. The past is our abstraction of our abstract memory of what came before, or our abstract measurement of tracing back and tracing forward.
I know you framed that with me in our conversation on potential. It seems so strange though to say that the past doesn't exist. Do you understand? Because it means
the past did exist as the present, but now no longer exists. But the past existed as the present back when that was the present.
But it still seems to me like I'm saying a truth statement when I say that George Washington was the first president of the United States. And I don't know if this breaks it or not, because
but he's not now the president of the United States in the past, right?
If we were to rewind time, then yes, he would still be the president in the past.
If we rewound it somehow, if we could theoretically do that.
Yeah. That's the ploy that the determinists use all the time in order to argue their point is rewind time.
Right. Yeah. It's a thought experiment. It's not meant as a practical experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, I'll admit, I have to spend more time thinking about this, how I think about your concept there of necessary and do I think therefore is it accurate to say that no other option is possible? So I have to think more on that one. So that's maybe something I've got to sit with. Sorry, Matt.
If we're reversing time over and over again, if we're trying to find out if somebody is, I guess you would have to say, free from themselves in order to say rewinding time might result in a different solution, a different choice being made. And I don't think we're talking about freedom from self, because that oversimplifies the complexity of choice making.
Plus, that seems like it wouldn't fit within our conception of free will. If you're free
Right.
from yourself, then who's the one making the decision there? So that's why I kind of disagree with the conception of rewind time and can he do otherwise, because they wouldn't do otherwise if they freely chose their decision.
Exactly.
It would just be like rewinding a tape and, oh, he didn't go through this door that time. I mean, of course not. You're rewinding a tape.
But what if you then went one instant before that? Would you also say he would have done the exact same thing?
I mean, it's still the same thing. It's like rewinding a tape one microsecond backwards.
That's
no. But we're not talking about. We're talking about rewinding and not playing it back forward. I'm talking rather than rewind it. Say
maybe like cloning him. Is that would that be a better example?
How about this?
Or cloning the universe?
Yeah, let's just say this. Let's say you could duplicate the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Every molecule, every particle in exactly like everything identical. Let's say you can make 1 million copies of the universe at a single instant.
Mm-hmm.
Would everybody make absent randomness? Would each one of those universes operate the same way in the next instant?
So, I would say that both the determinist and the libertarian, or at least me conceiving of it through a libertarian sense, would say that there would be no differences between those two universes or those infinite universes, whatever, because they were like the person freely chose this action due to
the state of the universe. The state of the universe constrained the action to.
Well, I was going to say the constraint of the individual is what. Right.
But the individual is part of the universe, right? Like we have to stop thinking.
So okay, yeah. If you're referring to the individual as the state of the universe, then sure. But it seems like that's almost like too broad of a scope in which to paint. Like you could say.
I don't think so. I think it has to be that. I think we're mistaken to think of us as outside of the universe. Like
here's maybe an analogy. If say like President Trump writes a bill, are you going to say
that could never happen? So let's not go with that.
Would you say that it's due to the entire population of the United States that voted for him that wrote that bill, or would you say that it's the president that wrote the bill?
No, but.
And that's why I'm saying, like, in order to say that it's the entire state of the universe that did this,
those are different layers.
Seems like too broad of a scope.
Those are different layers of abstraction. I can look at that. To become president, he had to have all those people vote for him, but he also had to have the individual thoughts that went into writing that bill.
Sure, and I would agree that in order for the person to make a choice, there has to be a universe in which they exist within, and they also have to have their parents that procreated them, and they have to have the environment in which they could survive long enough in order to make such a choice. But I wouldn't say that all of those things were what necessitated the choice such that it could not be any other way.
But I think we're really getting stuck on this, and I think we're having slightly different, but I think we're both uncomfortable with this. Couldn't be some other way. There's something that's not. I think we're putting meaning to it that we maybe shouldn't be here. I don't know. This is what I've got to think about more.
It may be because it's such a weirdly parsed phrase that I'm usually skeptical of using it, but I have to almost like resort to using it just in order to speak about things like free will, because like it's like the admittance of possibility. Maybe it would be okay. So maybe the problem is like referring to it in a past sense, and a better way in which to describe free will would be sort of the Aristotelian acceptance of potential, where there are these branches of the universe. And there's a way in, like, I've seen some people try to do this with quantum mechanics. Like they admit that the wave function is the set of all possibilities. And then just tying it to free will, the conscious focus on one of those possibilities is what collapses it into becoming an actual reality. Yeah. I don't know which exactly would be the explanation, which interpretation would be that. It might be the part of the Copenhagen one. The Copenhagen one sort of steps away from making those big metaphysical statements.
Well, then there's also the multiverse version where
there's the Everettian
is its own universe, which has conceptual. It's hard to imagine that too. Although apparently there's some math that works with it. Sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see if I can pull this together between John and me and you, Brett. It seems to me that, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, that we kind of all three kind of agree with a concept of self-determinacy, correct?
Sure.
And then we're trying to figure out whether or not you can also layer this concept of free will onto that. So let me put it this way. Let's say that we all three agree with the concept of self-determinacy as an analysis of the way the brain works. And then in a practical sense, in the social day-to-day interactions of people and the way we interact in our social construct, that is where the term free will works. Could we maybe all three agree with that framing of it?
And is that really, isn't that sort of compatibilism though? Like that's what I'm trying to.
I don't care about that. I'm trying to use this term free will in a way we can agree with.
I think so. If we're saying free, that our system, free from outside constraints, can make decisions and make choices outside of constraints, then we're free. Is that another way of saying what you just said?
Right.
So then I'd say, cautiously, I'd say yes.
Okay.
I agree.
I really wanted to push to that point because it feels like we're saying 99.9% the same thing.
Well, I don't know if John and I are I don't know. I don't know if.
Well, I would love to know how John differentiates all this.
Okay, good.
It's not obvious to me that he's not saying the same things.
Okay, so my disagreement with pleasure of doubt is I do not think that we should, so maybe it's a normative position. I don't think that we should hold people responsible, morally responsible for actions that were outside of their control. Do you agree with that or disagree with that, actually?
Me or
you, Brett? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, but within a context. I mean,
wait. You do agree that we shouldn't hold people morally responsible for actions outside of their control?
Yes, but I think we have to put some constraints on it. Like I think, we do make like our deliberations for that purpose. I would say are things that are in our control. Like so. If I if I'm trying to think, like here's the thing: our concepts of responsibility, our concepts of morality, our concepts of responsibility, all play a role in this cause and effect chain as much as everything, right? Like the concept of responsibility is important. It plays a critical role in society. I think the way we have colloquially worked it out, I think works. When we make the things that are in our deliberate choice are in our control for that purpose, whether or not it's determined or not determined, versus, I don't know, a pure, doing something deliberately versus doing something accidentally there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And
so it's strange because I could have sworn that you think that if we don't have free will, we can still people would still have moral responsibility for their actions. In fact, I think that's something that you had mentioned in our last conversation, which seems to run counter to at least what I'm saying here.
Yeah, and I'll admit I'm fighting my concentration, starting to wane. So we may need to I'll wait for Matt.
It's getting kind of late.
Yeah, I'm fighting my concentration, starting to wane. I think that's responsibility is a good conversation and one that's an important part of this conversation. But I'm fighting my I'm starting to get a little tired. How about you? How about you guys? Is this?
Yeah, it's probably a good time to wrap up.
but I feel this has been good. I think we've better understood. I always say the first step to consider a discussion productive if you leave better understanding each other's positions. And I think we have. I think we've narrowed down areas of agreement, we've narrowed down areas of disagreement, and we've zeroed in on those areas of disagreement. So to me, this has been quite a productive conversation. And I was a little worried we'd just be repeating our last conversation, but I think we've...
I was surprised we didn't seem to do that at all here. There was one thing, if we can have like a bit of time, that maybe this would be more directed at you, Matthew, because I know that you had read my Twitter thread on like the way in which I like my attempt to build a conceptual model for free will while still accepting both determinism and indeterminism. Like using both of those, I can sort of create a model that sort of meets a criteria of free will within that. And maybe it's a compatibilist model or not, but it at least made some amount of sense. Do you want me to maybe go into that Twitter thread, or do you want to maybe bring up your disagreements with it?
I confess I was having such a hard time navigating through Twitter that I couldn't make sense of your argument.
Okay. So the basic argument is that, yes, it would be the case that we would not have free will if everything had some sort of singular causal factor to it where it could not be otherwise. There was this necessary causation where the prior state of the universe necessarily made it such that the current state of the universe occurs, such that the posteriori state of the universe also occurs in this one specific way. If that were true, then yes, we'd have no free will. Also, if it was the case that there was no causation at all sort of taking place within the universe, like things happen randomly on a spur of probabilities, these would all be things sort of outside of our control, and just also a case in which there would be no free will. Now, I don't think that the universe in which we exist within is one of those two options. I think we exist within a universe in which there is both the necessary causal chain of events that takes place, as well as the unnecessary causal popping in or probabilistic events within the universe that are taking place. And I think that, okay, in order to make a model of free will using both of those, this is what like William James, or somewhat based off of William James, but in order to explain it, there's kind of this chance plus choice model in order for free will to sort of take place, where yes, it is the case that say I want to make a decision. Or actually, let me refer back to my thread just because it's a little bit hazy in my memory. But okay, so yeah, there's chance plus choice. So given a set of requirements or something that I want to do, so there's will there. And I'm not saying that our will is undetermined. I believe we have sort of desires for things that make up who we are. Given that, say I have the desire to eat, let's just take that as a single force of will or influencing me. Given that, I can sort of take the time and allow uncertainly or random thoughts to come into my head, things that were sort of outside of my control, and deliberate over them, same way that you were referring to, Pod, and then so there's the chance where these possibilities come to us, even if they're just intellectual possibilities come to us, and then make a choice regarding one of those, so that it's not the case that in order for the choice to be a live one, because there is a clear distinction between a live option and a dead option in regards to choices that come to us, it has to meet the criteria of the will. So say I have the will to eat, then the options to say have a hamburger, have a steak, and have macaroni would all fit that criteria. So there would be will there, but it would still be free because each of these things kind of came with where they were not determined by, they're still free in that any one of them necessarily follows from my having a desire to eat. So, and I think that's maybe the point of distinction, because I know you've brought that up before, Brett, that you don't accept the term necessary prior to causation, because that, at least for me, seems like a major sticking point, because and maybe we brought that up at the beginning of this conversation. Sorry, I feel like I'm kind of
I know. I passed the moment where sort of that switch goes off in my brain where I'm like,
okay.
I'm coherent,
yeah, sorry.
and then I'm not coherent. But I think that's a good, like, what I really do want to do before we start this up again is like, I think next time I had a stomach flu this week, so I couldn't really prepare too much for this, but I'd like to re-listen to these discussions, pull out some points, and maybe have a more focused next discussion. I just wasn't able to do that. And so maybe
what I'd like to do too is actually like bring up what are the arguments, because I think that when we have some sort of argument in front of us as like just a set of propositions and a conclusion, it's easier to sort of hold them at arm's length, so that you don't have to be like constantly defending it. Rather, it's something that we're both sort of like working with together to either strengthen or weaken. And yeah, I would love to do that with both of our arguments that were taking place, just to put them into syllogistic form, or even just a informal sort of format as well. That would be very fun.
That makes sense. So maybe what we should do for a couple of weeks is have some maybe Discord discussions, and work out some of these ideas. And guys in the chat, you're welcome to join in. I think you guys, or I'll put the links to all the Bevry Discord where we have a lot of these chats, and then maybe plan it out in advance before we even set the date. Know what we're going to do more specifically. And I'm sorry, like this, I meant to do it this week, but stomach flu went through my family, and the last few days have been pretty terrible that way. But yeah, I'm sorry, my brain's offline. But I've enjoyed this conversation. I hope you guys have as well. Do you have any last words, either of you?
Well, I'm trying to kind of compile my questions for next time. One concern that is not clear to me is what part randomness plays in self-determinacy, or what we might call free will. And then the other thing is I'm still very hung up in wanting to say we need to find a place for the concept of free will, and I think the best solution is in something like the realm of the practical, just living day-to-day life, that there's something about that sphere that's separate from what we have been doing 99% of this conversation, which is trying to dig down and dissect concepts. I think self-determinacy maps on very well when you're doing that work, but when you're in everyday practical life, you have to, it's just like when you switch from brain to mind. You don't use brain chemistry words to describe your feelings. You go into this other realm. And I think free will is the practical version of what we're doing in a conceptual realm with self-determinacy.
See, I gotta say, I think you're a compatibilist who doesn't like the term compatibilism.
Yeah, I've already admitted that because I've had it smacked over my head. And then you're just one of these non-free will people.
No, don't let the rude people on the internet dictate.
I'm not denying that I'm a compatibilist. I just don't like the term.
Yeah, no, and
I kind of like your term self-determinism over free will. I mean, I think there is a certain amount of, I guess, sentimentality that the term free will has. But I think for a lot of intents and purposes, self-determinism is what people mean when they say, like, I have free will.
Right. And I agree. And I think we should end on a note of agreement.
Right.
Yes.
Now,
which is great.
I want to raise an objection. Theosib is kind of like, arguing against my understanding of quantum mechanics. I would recommend this book, The Mystery of the Quantum World, to him by Ewan Squires, if he wants to at least get.
You know what? Maybe what we could do is maybe I could moderate a debate discussion between you and Theo. Sorry, Theo.
Yeah, Theo.
Theosib. Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed you mentioned that you take sort of a information theoretic position there in the comments there, Theosib. If I'm understanding correctly, that's like cubism or QBIism, which is, funnily enough, I'm actually sympathetic towards. I quite like the interpretations that cubism takes. But I think there's some problems with it, but on a philosophical standpoint, I actually like cubism. So I don't know, maybe there wouldn't be as much disagreement as we might think.
So anyway, thank you, John. Thank you, Matthew. This was a great discussion. I think we will have more. Again, what I want to do on this channel is not worry about fitting everything into one discussion or even 5 discussions. That we should be free to really delve into these things. I think it's more fun, and I like getting into the weeds. I mean, I don't think a lot of discussions do that, and I think there's something great about that. Hopefully, you guys in the chat found it interesting. Hopefully, other people start to, catch on to this channel. And so, thank you very much. There's lots more. I'm just going to try to start doing some recorded videos as well that I have planned. Just have to get off my butt and start doing it. And of course, everyone should check in every Saturday or Sunday on the Beverly Me YouTube channel. We have these great discussions going through John Vervecchi's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which I recommend to everyone. It's a great series that'll, I think, affect your lives in a positive way. So that's something. And John, I'll put your Twitter and do you have a YouTube or your own YouTube, or I can't.
Yeah, I don't use it too often. Like, I actually have 2 YouTubes. One that was like my holdover from my Minecraft channel that I used to do a lot of things on. And then I created this other channel where I put my screenplay and a video on metaphorical truths on there. So, all right, I can give you that if you want.
So yeah, and I'll link Matthew to your channel as well, the Betterment Project, which you guys should definitely check out as well. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to end the stream and wish everybody a great night. Thanks, guys, and thank you, and again, thanks you to the chat. Thanks so much for stopping by and sticking with us. That was great. I love having people Minecraft. I love having people watch. I will get better at following the chat while having conversations. I'm sure it's a skill that'll come with time. All right, guys, have a great night.
Good night.
Hold on, are we?